Registry Matters is an independent production. The opinions and ideas here are that of the host and do not reflect the opinions of any other organization. If you have problems with these thoughts, FYP.
Recording live from FYP Studios East and West. Transmitting across the internet. This is episode 232 of Registry Matters. Happy Saturday night, sir. How are you?
Thank you. Good to be back with you here at FYP Studios West.
I went down the roster of all the extra guests and so forth that I could come up with, and none were available or interested, so back to you.
Isn't that a tragedy?
It's really messed up. But whatever. Let's see, anything I wanted to ask you? I don't think there's anything I wanted to ask you, but so do you want to just tell me what we're going to do tonight and we'll just go for it?
We're going to do a question or maybe two. I've got one I may throw in at the last second that just came today. And we've got this article from the appeal that we're going to deeply dive into. I know it's just going to excite you to get into this article from the appeal, right?
Yes, absolutely. I can't wait because I did all the work on the other stuff, and then at the last minute you changed everything on me.
Oh, well, too bad.
Mm-hmm. I got more for you coming here in a minute.
So, all righty. Well, what else are we going to do? You've got a mystery speaker tonight, right?
I do. I think you will be the only one that gets it, and our political junkie person, maybe he'll get it. But anywho.
All right. Well, we're going to also talk about the unemployment report. Not that that has anything directly to do with PFRs, but we're going to talk about the stellar employment number that came out Friday, which is just 24 hours ago.
I would argue, though, that even if that number, given the current situation, it's very good for anybody with a felony, especially our class of people.
It's absolutely good for everyone. However, there's still a fair amount of discrimination and statutory prohibitions for people in the registry. But it certainly changes your bargaining position if you are not within a statutory provision, because employers are desperate to keep employees. And it doesn't matter if you're on the PFR registry. If you're reliable and you've been showing up, you have value.
What could you repeat a jargon word in there? Did you say something statutory? What did you say?
Statutory prohibitions. There are people who would be able to work, but for the statutes that do not allow them to work in locations because of proximity.
I gotcha. I thought that's what you meant. Or that field is barred to you.
That would be another one where there's a statutory prohibition against certain occupations. And of course, some occupations themselves prohibit people, but I'm more worried about what's in statute.
Okay, I gotcha. All right. Well, let's. This voicemail came in just about an hour ago, and you were very impressed with the composition, and you appreciated the question. So this is from John from Nevada.
Hi, Larry and Andy. This is John. I'm from Nevada, and I had a question about the way that Nevada does their tiering. Nevada follows a crime-based tier system. In the example, I was charged with what would be considered a tier 3 crime, which was lewdness with a minor under 14. However, I pled to a crime that moves me to attempted lewdness with a minor under 16. Under Nevada statute, the under 14 would have been a tier 3, and the under 16 would have been a tier 2. When I reached out to the board responsible for tiering, they weren't able to give me an answer on which way it would go. All they did is say that they would need to do research and contact law enforcement about where to place me. So my question for you is, in your experience for crime-based tier systems, do they put you based on the pled to crime, or do they follow more of the crime that you were originally charged with? Thank you very much for your time to both of you. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. FYP.
So that was John in Nevada, and is a recent patron and listening to us live, Larry. So make sure you give proper advice, because the person could reach out and chat and slap you or something.
Yes, and he came in at the $1,400 level.
Probably.
So, Actually, now, did that come in on the old-fashioned phone? It sounds like the first phone call we've had in a while.
It is the him if he would do a voice memo, but that's I said, or you could just phone it in. But I told him to compose it, create your thoughts, so you're not doing a whole bunch of ums and ums and ums. He said his communications college professor would be very proud.
That is a very well put together question. I think when you're looking for a guest host, you might ought to consider him.
Oh, I can replace you with this guy? Perfect. I'm on it.
So, all right. You do concede I haven't had a lot of time to research the statutes of the state, right?
You know all 50 states like on the back of your hand. That's what I thought.
So,
I tell you what I told him. I said that I'm pretty sure, but I will confer with you, that it is based on the one that you plea out to.
that would be the general rule. I would agree with that. If there's some nuance in that state statute that I'm not aware of that says the underlying facts in an indictment, but that would be so rare because the underlying facts in the indictment have yet to be proven out. That's just a charge document. So therefore, it's an allegation that hasn't been sustained. What's been sustained is what's proven in a court of law or what's pled to. So in the process of the plea, now this is where it's going to get really nuanced. The prosecution would have put forth a factual basis to justify the court accepting the plea. So as the plea was unfolding, they would have called the case number and the parties of the state, and they would ask the attorneys to state their appearances, and the defense attorney and the state would have announced their name and which party they were representing. And then, Your Honor, we're doing a plea today. In most instances, the prosecution would lay the factual foundation. You need subject matter jurisdiction. So therefore, they have to establish that a crime occurred within a jurisdiction of the court. And they need a factual basis that the person broke a statute. So they would say what the person did. Had this case gone to trial, the state would have proven this. If there is some nuance in Nevada statute that says for registration purposes that it's the factual basis that controls rather than the actual offense, that where they decide how to tier the person, this is going to require him to have an attorney that understands registration. And he's going to probably end up filing a petition for declaratory judgment.
Can you explain again? I'm sure we've heard this before. What declaratory judgment is?
Well, let's hope that he can resolve it through diplomacy, through the administrative process. But if he can't get the satisfaction, there's a significant difference. If Nevada followed the AWA guidelines, he would be twice a year as a Tier 2 with at least the opportunity to be removed after 25 years versus 4 times a year with no opportunity. So there's a significant, if he's got 25 years or more of life expectancy, this would be a significant difference. So therefore, he would want to file this petition for declaratory judgment. What that is you're asking a court to interpret the law because the bureaucrats, since they have political pressure on them, they may interpret it more tightly and say, well, you're a Tier 3. And they can do that with just the flimsiest reason and force you to litigate. And the court theoretically has more independence. And the court, although you remember Judge Persky, right?
I do. I've heard of it. Yeah, the judge in California with Brock. Can't think of it. Brock Turner.
So there's a limitation with states that elect judges how much autonomy and independence they have. But theoretically, a judge would have more independence than someone who serves at the pleasure of an elected official like the governor or whoever that elected official might be that makes this determination. So I'm afraid that's where this might head, is he'll have to file a petition for declaratory relief and let a court rule upon what tier he is. And that wouldn't take him off the registry, but it would give him a path off if they agree with him that he's a Tier 2.
Okay. I think I follow all of that. Do you have any follow-up questions that you want to ask this individual, or was the question like more or less complete enough for you to do all that you
It,
needed to do to answer it?
it was complete enough, but being that he's a generous patron, I'd be happy to discuss it off the air and we could come back to it later after we've further developed it in terms of what his strategy is going to be.
Well, very good. Then would you like to head over to this new article in the appeal? Are we there?
Oh, I dread this thing. So
So this is an article that was released July 8th, which I think is yesterday, and by a friend of everyone we know. Well, everyone knows this individual is a man named Steve Yoder, and it's regarding the United States Marshals PFR address verification sweeps. And you know, you said, well, we don't really have anything going on today. And, so I spent my whole morning, I made a nice little smoothie this morning, and I spent like 2 or 3 hours reading the articles. And then at 4 o'clock you go, never mind. We're not doing that. So I'm kind of pissed off at you at the moment, but, so I guess we'll stick with it.
well, I guess you just have to tell people to quit giving us content.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Oh.
So what else? Tell me why is this relevant for us?
Because I said it is.
Oh, all right. Well, if my memory serves, I think literally the first conference I went to is the one in Atlanta, and I'm pretty sure he presented. If it wasn't that one, then it was the one after that. And as I recall, he also received one of the awards that NARSOL gives out called Braveheart.
That's what I'm told. I didn't remember the Braveheart, but our communications director reminded me that he had been awarded the Braveheart. So I don't remember it, but I trust her.
That she's probably pretty reliable on these things, I would say. You indicated that you wanted to dissect the political ramifications as well as the practical ones for these sweeps. Is that what you intend on doing this evening?
That is, yes. I cut and pasted from Steve's article and I put it into a Word document and I added paragraph numbers for purposes of this interview. And we can make the document available in the show notes if you like.
All right. Well, let's begin that. In the article in paragraph 2, it states, so we're going to talk about an individual that was reported in the article. It says, Gary, a 62-year-old Texas's PFR registry dates, 62-year-old that is on Texas's PFR registry dates the problem with his neighbors to a visit by the police in 2018. After a successful real estate career, he lives in a relatively safe neighborhood outside of Dallas, identifies as conservative, and has friends on the police force. He's donated to police charities, once giving $10,000 to the family of an officer killed on duty. I'm sure you have something snarky about what Gary has said about his support of the police.
Well, I wouldn't say it's snarky at all. It does epitomize what I've been saying for nearly 5 years we've done this program. Gary does not see any connection with his conservative political leanings and the problems related to the PFR registry.
To give a little background on him, though, he was convicted of possession. I'll leave the rest to your imagination. Possession in 2007, and he spent 5 years in prison and 10 years on probation, which he discharged successfully, and Gary hasn't reoffended since, state records show. He is still being visited by police, and according to the article, he receives visits from the U.S. Marshals. Can you explain? So do me a favor. Can you actually, does Texas have, is he still on the registry part? Is he on like lifetime registry? What would be the conditions that he has?
Well, I'm assuming he's on the registry, which triggers the visits from law enforcement verifying his residency.
Okay, and then why would federal agents get involved? I'm assuming he has just state level charges. Why would the federal marshals get in?
Good question. Since 2006, the federal government has funneled millions of dollars into sometimes massive operations to verify addresses of those on the PFR registries across the country. According to the article, it's hard to tell how often these happen because the Marshal Service didn't respond to multiple requests about how many operations they ran in the latest fiscal year. But a look at how authorities talk about the operations and the flattering press coverage they generate indicates their importance in selling the public on more police. They do these operations for two reasons. First, they have the budget, and second, the public supports what they're doing overwhelmingly.
I mean, this would go to the Butts County one where you see Facebook posts going, "Thanks, Sheriff, for keeping the people safe," where there's signs in the people's yards on Halloween, right?
Correct.
And then the article points out some studies that show they likely do nothing to improve public safety. And I mean, like the interview I did with Emily Horowitz and Kristen, I cannot remember her last name, from the conference a couple weeks back. Like they were talking about that these things don't do anything to improve the safety. So what reason do they do these things?
Because the money has been appropriated and because the public supports the operations.
The article also points out that meanwhile, programs with proven track records in preventing sexual violence or successful reintegrating people previously punished for sexual crimes get little federal help. And literally, Larry, I don't understand why that would be the case.
Well, what are you really having difficulty understanding? Crimes that do not occur are very difficult to prove with statistics. On the other hand, it's relatively easy to quantify how many PFR's doors have been knocked on and how many have been charged with noncompliance after the sweeps have concluded. I mean, I don't understand why that's hard to understand.
Because I can come up with a way to make a test that would go this route and give you hard statistics to know the difference, but we could talk about that another time. But so based on quotes from Gary in paragraph 8 of the article, his attitude has not changed. He said law enforcement have an impossible job. I won't disagree with that statement. They are really in a world of hurt. And so I have the ultimate respect for them, he said. But I felt that wearing the tactical vest was clearly an act of intimidation and clearly an act to embarrass the hell out of me with my neighbors. Why the tactical gear, Larry? You say this is a civil regulatory scheme. Again, you say it's a civil regulatory scheme. Doesn't sound like it's combat.
So I think Gary himself answered that question. They do it for the results it achieves. In paragraph 7, Gary said, the raid poisoned his neighbors against him, his wife and 2-year-old son. Most wouldn't speak to him. He's talking about his neighbors for months, and some still don't. Today, his wife is terrified whenever someone they know knocks. That's why they do it.
I'll tell you something that would be very easy to quantify. How many times have they gone to a person's house like this and they have encountered, you know, like the drug cartel's level of arsenal to fire back at them? I would be willing to bet that by far and large, they are very quiet, compliant, and you could just send over the most meek and small stature officer to go like, are you here? And they would go, yep. And then they could just leave. It could be like somebody just almost like in a plain, whatever, an unmarked car or something like that doesn't draw a whole lot of attention. Do you think that would work?
It would work, but that's not the point of this. The point is the show. It's kind of like airport security. And I'm not one of those. I'm not one of those who denies the need for security. I think we saw 21 years ago the need for good comprehensive security at our airports. But a lot of what they do is theater. When they have these massive swarms of agents come around a person because of some particular reason that was triggered, it's all theater. It makes people feel good about paying their $5.60 per trip, not per trip, per liftoff. Each time you go through a screening, it's a $5.60 charge to be fondled and groped, and to have that machine look over your body and go through all that stuff. It's theater, and this is theater. When they go out to do this plays well with the public. It's not about their safety. They could do exactly what you say. It's a civil regulatory scheme. They would have virtually no statistics to show that any PFR has pulled a weapon on them. I would challenge you, officers, I know you're listening, send us your documentation of when you have had someone threaten you. Now, they say ugly things to you because you violate their rights.
Right. You
embarrass them. You knock on their doors at unreasonable hours. So you will get some pushback for that. But you have never had a weapon pulled on you by a PFR. And I say never. I seldom say never, but I doubt that you've had a weapon pulled on a compliance check.
I believe that. All right, well, let's continue. Congress passed and President Bush signed the Adam Walsh Act in 2006. According to the appeal on paragraph 11, Much of the debate was in the run-up to the Adam Walsh Act was grounded in myth. In 2005, Florida Representative Mark Foley, a Republican, sponsored the bill that would become Title I of the Adam Walsh Act. There is a 90% likelihood of recidivism for sexual crimes against children. He said on the House floor that year, 90%. That is their record. It is worthwhile to remind folks that Foley resigned in 2006 for sending sexually explicit instant messages to an underage congressional page. Now, you have to admit that's funny.
You have to admit that's funny, don't you, Andy? Can you admit,
That's
since
funny.
you're laughing, that this is funny?
I read that already. That was funny. That was funny the first time I read it. It's just, it's the same thing with Anthony Weiner. He did something similar, supporting all the legislation to make life hell, and then he ends up doing something similar. But also, according to the article, the hyperbole worked and the law passed, and the act ratcheted up penalties for people convicted of sex crimes who don't keep up their details up to date. It requires them to register in person between 1 and 4 times a year and no more than 3 business days after any change of name, residence, employment, student status. We can also throw in cars and boats and, where did you go shopping for your underwear last week? And it makes failure to register a federal crime punishable by 10 years in prison. I'm still confusing how legally the Marshals were involved. Yeah, I still don't see how, unless Texas decided to call Chuck Norris and the U.S. Marshals there on that TV show.
Well, in paragraph 13, the article states that the law also designated the U.S. Marshals the lead agency responsible for checking that registrants are compliant, teaming up with state and local cops in fugitive task forces that knock on doors to check that they live at the address listed. Now, you hear that, fugitive task forces for a civil regulatory scheme. As the enforcement arm of the federal courts, the Marshal Service is involved in almost every federal law enforcement initiative and conducts related tasks like tracking down those wanted for federal crimes, transporting prisoners, and carrying out many other special missions. But again, that's why you guys have to lower your resistance to using the term civil regulatory scheme. You've got to say, we're not fugitive, folks. We're not.
Yeah. So I'm looking up the definition of fugitive, just to be clear, because this says fugitive task forces in the definition of fugitive, just to make sure I was clear, running away or fleeing as from the law. And I don't think PFRs that are sitting at home waiting for their compliance checks would be considered fugitives.
I would agree, but if they are truly missing at that point, they could become a fugitive. But merely the Address Verification Act itself would be referred to a fugitive task force if they were in fact in noncompliance.
So I do have a question for you, though. Why can't you admit it's all about the money? In paragraph 15, it is noted that these mobilizations also funnel federal dollars to local popo. The Osceola County Sheriff's Office in Florida noted in a release last November that the Marshals had funded 450 hours of overtime for the department that was funding, not funneled, funding 450 hours of overtime for the department during a 5-month door-knocking sweep called Operation Squeaky Wheels. The Marshals' 2022 budget request for apprehending fugitives and non-compliant sex offenders is $610 million. The largest item in the agency's budget, and an increase of 4% if enacted. $610 million is quite a bit of money. Can you at least admit this is really just all about the Benjamins?
I can, but can you at least admit that it's not likely that any conservative elected official would be willing to consider reducing funding to law enforcement, and that's the problem. Those who claim that they oppose these flagrant examples of waste consistently vote for those who promote the very operations that they claim that they oppose. Can you admit that?
I don't know that I have enough conversations with people, so I'll let you have that one as being the truthus. Okay, I'll let you.
Okay.
I'll let you have that one. And then to continue on, but in paragraph 17, the appeal stated. Is that where I'm supposed to say that Yoder stated?
Yep.
Okay, so Yoder stated the flood of money. I'll say the appeal article stated the flood of money doesn't appear to produce much. In a typical sweep last summer in Florida, the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office announced that it had teamed with the Marshals to send out a swarm of cops to check on 555 people on the state registry over the course of 8 days. They made a total of 16 arrests, according to a Freedom of Information request the appeal filed with the state attorney's office to ask about changes in the number of pending cases. Arrest warrants for 2 more people were pending. Neither the state attorney nor the sheriff's office answered questions about what the arrests were for or the cost of the operation. But Sheriff's Chief Deputy Brian Hester said in a press conference that the most common charge was failure to report a change of address or vehicle. This does sound ridiculous. If I happen to like have a win of money and I go buy a new car, I have not really done anything that they could not easily track down. I would have had to register the vehicle. I would have had to get all of the civil regulatory schemes around that whole thing. And they would be able to easily look up John Doe owns this new car. Like, why is that a failure?
Well, because you didn't report it, so it was timely listed. But the data in there, you being the data guru that you are, 555 people, they stretched it over 8 days, and they found mostly people who had not timely reported something, which didn't say that they were out of compliance with their location of residence. It was for failure to report a job change and those kind of things. But again, if you could admit that the conservative side is never going to agree to reduce this funding, they pay all this, they play this to the hilt about how fiscally responsible they are and that they believe every tax dollar should be guarded and that we should be so frugal. But try to get a conservative to talk about reducing funding to law enforcement. Listen to how the progressives are being vilified for talking about any type of reduction. And tell me that this is not a problem that comes from the conservative side. But anyway, I'll get to the article itself. In paragraph 18, the article states, in May 2021, operation in Tennessee, Shelby County, Sheriff Lloyd Bonner announced an immensely successful effort his department and the Marshals checking on 146 PFRs. They nabbed a total of 10, not for repeat sexual crimes, but for technical lapses like failing to update their address or driver's license. Unfortunately, as long as there's funding for these operations, they will continue. So please, my conservative listeners, hold these people accountable. Ask them, how can you justify this? And tell them to square this with their rhetoric about how frugal and how much we need to watch every dollar of expenditure and see what they say.
In paragraph 19, the article states, for the hundreds of registrants targeted and sometimes their families, these are frightening intrusions. On November 29th at 2021 at about noon, Ernest, a Missouri registrant, was at home on the 500-acre farm he owns. He and his mother, who lives with him, were outside when 3 SUVs came barreling down his lane and skidded to a stop. I can just see it, like a team of 6 cops, 3 sheriffs, and 3 marshals dressed in bulletproof vests. They jump out. Me being a military guy, I got 22 years in the Marine Corps. I'm surprised that he didn't actually have some PTSD and start shooting at them immediately. But immediately I focused on the rear marshal who came out with his hand on his weapon, said Ernest, who didn't want his real name used in the story. They checked his license plates, and then they left. I bet you they didn't screech out of there. Isn't there something that can be done about this? Do you have any grounds to stand on if they come at you like that? Have they trespassed? Anything like that?
Yes, I think there are a number of things that could be attempted. We could attempt to change the law, but that's going to require a lot of political support that's not likely to materialize soon, in particular conservative support. Remember, I've told you to the audience, it takes conservatives to do liberal things, and it takes liberal to do conservative things. So any reduction in law enforcement has to be led by conservatives. Any reduction in human services, like putting the cap on welfare benefits back in 96, 95, I forget what year that Clinton signed the Welfare Reform Act, that has to get the blessing of liberals. So it takes the opposite party to do the things. So we need conservative buy-in. But anyway, what we could do is try to change the law that's not likely due to political realities, or we can go with some litigation.
What would litigation focus on if that were the case? What would be the claims? What would the claims be, since you acknowledge that the law, So I can read the law, Larry, and the law says that you can do this. So how am I going to challenge the law that says this is what the law says?
Well, there's going to get more complicated because I maintain there's some jurisdictional problems with the feds being involved in this. I do acknowledge that local law enforcement can deputize, and I'm assuming they can deputize these marshals. Most sheriffs could probably do that within their scope of a sheriff. But just because you can deputize a person does not mean that they're allowed to make up the law as they go. So therefore, you don't have rights to do just anything you want. You remember the little clip you have about I got my rights?
I do.
I got my rights to do anything I want to do. I'm a police officer.
Well, no, that's not entirely the case. So what you would do is you would hammer that registration as a non-punitive civil regulatory scheme, and this type of monitoring is out of bounds in the absence of probable cause. Meaning, like, if a person was missing off of the grid and they had already determined that they were not at the address that they had listed, then you've got an elevated probable cause to be more concerned about them. So then you could ratchet up what you're doing. But in addition, you would focus on the psychological harm that these incidents, as they're described, they have, particularly on innocent family members. But be prepared when you make this assertion, when you make this claim, that you're going to have to open your mental health records to scrutiny. And a lot of people are going to be resistant to do that. But that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to get family members to get medical treatment and to say that they're harmed. And I'm sure they are. I have no doubt. You got a 12-year-old kid that sees this happen. I mean, you've got something around the 12, 13, 14-year-old in your family. I can't imagine this is very good for them.
No, I would also, depending on their, excuse me, on like, what's the word? Salt, metal, whatever, like how much can they handle like that kind of pressure? And I imagine that most kids cannot. And I know that my kid, there's no freaking way that he would be able to stand up to that level of intimidation. All right. Well, then in paragraph 25, it states sweep announcements often convey danger and sell why cops are needed. That might explain why so many happen on or around the Halloween kind of time frame. Is there any evidence that sex crimes increase? Really, it's not even like sex crimes, but like child abductions kind of thing is what, like, don't let your kids out by themselves. There's a dangerous person standing behind that bush. And I know we talk about like, really, they probably should be watching traffic more because kids get hit and run on Halloween. Is there any evidence that anything happens on Halloween?
Not that I'm aware of. There is not. And the appeal gets this because in paragraph 26, the article states, cops also use raids to promote the message that police are all that stands between families and mayhem. And quote, we are here to make sure your children and families are safe, Florida Sheriff Marcos Lopez said in a Facebook video about last year's Operation Squeaky Wheels. Sexual predators and offenders, and this is, I get to put on my accent, you better comply with Florida law, because I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to arrest you and book you in the county jail where you belong time and time again, he added while pointing at the camera.
Paragraph 30 points out that a wealth of research indicates that ex-offenders are more likely to stay crime-free when they have access to education, housing, transportation, jobs, and social support, according to a 2014 study in the Journal of Qualitative Criminal Justice and Criminology. Circles of Support and Accountability, COSA, this is a program funded by Vermont's Department of Corrections and in a few locations around the country, gives ex-offenders a circle of volunteer supporters to help them navigate reentry barriers. A randomized control trial of COSA in Minnesota found the program cut sexual offense recidivism by 88% and recidivism other offenses by 49 to 57%. COSA has no dedicated sources of federal funding, though Vermont has used some federal reentry money to run its programs. Can you explain any of this?
Well, I can explain it. You got a bunch of liberals up there in Minnesota and Vermont, but I'll defer to the article. It says, despite the research, quote, we spend much more money on registration, community notification, residence restrictions, and civil commitment than we do on any forms of prevention. These programs scrape by on a fraction of what the Marshals work with. Again, the Marshals are funded because the people want them funded. If the people want these programs funded, you have to tell your U.S. senator and your U.S. representative that you do not support them in funneling all this money to the marshals and nothing for prevention. If they don't hear that from you, they're not likely to make that a budget priority.
So let's just say, Larry, that I have taken all of Larry's training and that whole segment that we did on do not talk to the police, and I have big cojones, and the police roll up on my property, and I go, FYP. Do I have any grounds to stand on, like, not complying with what they're trying to get me to do? Like, are there going to be ramifications for me doing this?
So you were asking me, should PFRs comply with these operations? Is that your question?
Basically. Yeah, I'm like,
So
yeah. Should they comply with it? Yeah.
I would really, it's a complicated question because there's so many variables. In some states, the PFR is required to permit his or her address to be verified in person. But having said that, this does not mean the PFR has no rights and they must permit searches of their residence and their computers and of their electronic devices. But if you tell them to pound sand, there's a risk of retaliation, and that is a very real risk.
Oh, and what do you mean by retaliation? And boy, I love the expression pound sand. I just think that that's awesome.
Well, there's so many things they can do. They can go to your neighbors and they can tell the neighbors that they have concerns about you, that you're not being cooperative and they don't know what you might be hiding. And they can give the neighbors special phone numbers to call if they observe anything. And of course, if you give the neighbors a little bit of suggestion about what you might be afraid of, the neighbors will magically start observing that type of thing. And then you'll bring down more scrutiny on yourself because they'll be coming to check on you more, but they won't tell you the neighbor called. They'll just drop by at an inopportune time because your teenage son had another teenager over playing, and they'll say, well, we just received a tip that there were minors here and we had concerns. But in addition, they'll look for technical violations. They'll go to your place of employment. And all of a sudden, your coworkers, after having been spoken to by law enforcement, they will not be so comfortable working around you. And they will look for a way to arrest you. Now, we always qualify. There are a couple of states. We've added Ohio to the list with Maryland. There appears the wind-driven snow. And these things don't occur in those states. But outside of the wind-driven pure states, these are real risk of things that could happen to you. And of course, I'm joking about that. Neither of those states are pure as the wind-driven snow.
Closing up here shortly. In paragraph 35, Gary says, despite how the police operation 4 years ago affected his family, he holds no resentment. I put myself in a position to have to incur whatever response the government had, he said. I'm not crying in my beer. Crying in my beer. Anyway, I did what I did. You people have a problem with PFRs who make comments like this. Can you explain? So I take responsibility for the actions that I did, Larry, as much as I possibly can. I think the prosecution was a little excessive, but I wasn't forced into it. Anyway, so I do get some kind of punishment. Why is that wrong?
Well, there's not anything wrong with that. What's wrong with it is when you justify the punishment after you've paid your debt to society. When he paid 5 years in prison and 10 years on probation. Now, had that offense happened in this state, being that he had no prior criminal record, he would have gotten probation to begin with. But he paid that debt to society. And now he's continuing to be punished, and his family, and he need not apologize for that. He can't take ownership for what the system has done that wasn't a part of his offense. If his lawyer had told him, in addition to all this punishment that will be a finite amount of punishment, there is going to be a lifetime of additional punishment that you and your family will suffer, and it will never end, he probably wouldn't have been so excited about the plea agreement that he took. So therefore, please don't apologize for unconstitutional impositions that society has done to you. You need to be critical. When someone asks you that question, you say, no, ma'am, I cannot take ownership for these unconstitutional laws. I paid my debt to society. My 15 years ended, and I should be free, as my family should be, to go on with my life. I do not own this. You do. But every offender that's interviewed, I don't care what state they're in, they always say what this one did.
This almost is like ex post facto apologizing. You can apologize for what it was when it was, but then don't pile on for more apology of what it is now. Is that fair?
That is correct. He would never have known this was coming, and it's not a part of the punishment. He doesn't have to apologize. What happens when they add something else that they don't have in existence right now? Is he going to apologize for that? Folks, don't apologize for mistakes that your fellow citizens have made through their elected representatives. Criticize them. Do not apologize for them. I criticize them every week on this program. I mean, there's no need to apologize.
Okay. I think we are pretty much done with this segment, unless there's anything else that we want to dig into. The only other thing, and I think I mentioned it earlier, was to do. We were talking about the statistics. If you were to find a state or an area that didn't have these marshals coming at them, to try and figure out the statistics of it, if you had one where they were going, to see what the effective rate of this process versus another one, you at least have like a control to figure out what the statistics are on the null side of the equation. That would be one way to figure out where you don't have the statistics.
All right, if you say so.
I mean, that's all I got on that particular thing. So you can sort of like prove a negative in this sort of context by having an experiment. Anywho, that was really all about I wanted to expand on in that segment.
Are you a first-time listener of Registry Matters? Well, then make us a part of your daily routine and subscribe today. Just search for Registry Matters through your favorite podcast app. Hit the subscribe button and you're off to the races. You can now enjoy hours of sarcasm and snark from Andy and Larry on a weekly basis. Oh, and there's some excellent information thrown in there too. Subscribing also encourages others of you people to get on the bandwagon and become regular Registry Matters listeners. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to Registry Matters right now. Help us keep fighting and continue to say FYP.
So I just dropped a very brief letter in that came in today. And if you see it in Dropbox, if you want to read that, it has a purpose. I didn't know that we'd have enough time, but I think we can address it.
I think we do. I will bring it up right now. I really don't like it when everyone sees everything. Okay. And so you want to talk about, this is from an individual named Arnold who is in Florida. You want to talk about irrational sex offense laws? Then have a look at Palm Beach County here in Florida. In case you're wondering, yes, this is the place where they botched the Jeffrey Epstein case, and now they're trying to save face and show how hard they can be with PFR offense charges, causing them to be overzealous in their prosecution. We, the incarcerated, are really looking forward to a response from you guys. I assume that this was sent to the Narsal place.
That is correct. I'm not really sure what he's looking for, but I would need more information on the botched. And I'm really confused about how a person sitting in jail would have the inside information to know the strength of the case against Epstein and all the considerations that the prosecutor was looking at in terms of whether they could secure a conviction back then. And they made that so-called sweetheart deal to him. It just seems ludicrous that you would have all that information. But what the response is he's looking for is beyond me. They're tough because that's what the people in that jurisdiction want. That's what they elected. That's what they want. If you don't believe they should be so tough, elect a different district attorney, or they call them state's attorneys in Florida. Elect a different state's attorney. It's really that simple. Put Krasner in charge there rather than what you've elected.
Right? So let me take a little bit of a detour. That there was a pretty long conversation going on our Discord server. I'm taking kind of a hardline stance on what you just described, that if the situation that we're in, not just on this issue, but we'll just use this one as the example, is because of the politicians that we elected to represent us. Had we done differently, had we gone to legislatures to testify, to do all that we can, I know even you'll admit you don't win everything, but maybe it's less bad. That I'm saying it's our fault that we're here versus it just being in general. It's like we are in control of our destiny to a certain degree. I got a fair amount of pushback from people, but I think that we can take a large degree, and I mean we the people, the Americans, we can take ownership for where things are. But to me, that's the good part, is that we can then go make the changes.
That is the beautiful thing about this country, is that we're self-governed. And we have had people reach out to us. We've had people come on our program that have said something to the effect that they were surprised at how much impact they had as a single person. I think just Don from South Carolina recently, he's pretty much a one-person operation.
That's what it seems like, lone wolf.
And the impact that he's having and has had. So therefore, to sit back and do nothing because you think you're spewing out some kind of radiation and that they know that they're not going to talk to you is absurd. Honestly, we don't know. And I'm saying that on the inside because I'm on the inside. We don't know whether you vote or not. We don't know how you vote. It's a secret ballot. We don't know any of those things. When you contact your elected state officials, which is the level I'm at, we don't know all that stuff, and we don't ask that kind of thing. What we do ask is we try to figure out if you live in the district, because it's kind of a taboo thing when someone reaches out about a problem and they're not your constituent because they have someone who represents them. So the first thing we ask when they're out of the district is there a particular bill that you're concerned about, and have you spoken to your state senator or your state rep? That's the first thing that we're going to ask. Not because we're afraid to talk to you, because it's just a professional courtesy that goes with it. You end up with your colleague mad at you if you're saying one thing and they were elected on a different platform, and you tell them, well, if I lived in if I represented you, I would. I don't represent you. I represent this district. So but otherwise, we don't know all those kind of things, and they're not relevant.
What you just said is you find out where you live in the district. Somebody could lie, yes or no?
Sure, I'm sure they do, yes.
Okay, so I live on 123 Main Street, and you go, oh, that's in our district. Meanwhile, I'm 1,000 miles across the country. You have no way of knowing. You just know that I gave you something of a valid address.
That is correct. That could happen.
Okay. So we, the PFRs, we could band together and call our representatives, and we end up with a 300-person district, overwhelming them with 10,000 calls saying that we all live at 123 Main Street. They'll never catch on.
But see, there's one little problem you have with that approach. It's the same problem I tell people. There are folks who like to chat with online with their digital, and there are folks who, like me, who like to chat with people verbally. And I try to explain to them to no avail that when you're chatting digitally with your keyboard, the person can lie to you because they have time to do the research, and they can justify the delay in the response because they could say the cat knocked over a bowl of something and they're cleaning it up, and that's why it took so long to respond. On the other hand, as we're having this conversation right now, you can't lie fast enough. So if you were to tell me you live in some part of our district that I'm very familiar with, and I were talking to you in a phone conversation, I could ask you something right away in response, and you wouldn't be able to do the research fast enough.
I got you. You would say, how was the Circle K when you drove by it or something like that? And I'd be like, the Circle K. And you're like, yeah, there's no Circle K. Piss off.
I would ask you more particular things if I knew the area well enough where you claim you lived.
Sure.
If I happen to catch the address and know the geographic location well, and I don't, the district is so vast that I don't. Yeah. But the people who represent those districts often do. They actually know their districts very well. In particular, when they're in an urban setting, because the districts tend to be more compact because of population, you're representing a certain number of people. And to get to 50,000 in an urban area, you don't need as much geographic territory as you need to get to 50,000 in a rural area. So you might be covering 3 counties if you're representing a rural area. But the advantage is when you're talking to someone, I know it's just distasteful to so many these days, but you can't lie fast enough. You can't do the research fast enough.
That's fair. That's fair.
So
all right. Well, we beat that for long enough. So we're going to take a little bit of a detour, and you want to talk about the jobs report that has 100% nothing to do with PFRs. However, I mean, it kind of does in a 2 or 3 degrees of separation point. Jobs report yesterday, 372, something like that.
Yes, 372,000 new jobs were added to the American economy in the month of June.
Okay.
So, fantastic news.
As I understand it. Maybe this number, I'm sure it does, but something around 150,000 jobs needs to be brought in per month to keep up with just like the natural birth rate and immigration kinds of things.
I used to hear that number. It also depends upon if you have a strong job market tends to bring people back into the labor force. And that's what's happening right now. The labor force, the participation rate has been inching higher because people that were discouraged in the past because of difficulty in finding employment are rejoining the workforce. So therefore, as the workforce expands, you need a higher number of job creations. But this is a stellar number, and it has been. There's a graph from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that shows the job creation. I don't know if you've got it up on the screen, but I do.
I have it up on the
I
screen.
have, so when you see the labor force participation rate going back to 2002, which is 20 years, it's been gradually going down, down, and down. And you notice, folks, it's been going down, down, and down under both Republican and Democratic administrations. It's been going down for demographic reasons. Our population is aging. The baby boomers that were born from the post-World War II through 1960 or so, wherever they cut that point off at, those people are entering their retirement years now, and they're exiting the labor force. So they measure the participation rate on the workforce age people who are expected to work. We don't expect you to work after you reach a certain age. So that rate had been going down for 20 years, and it dropped really bad in the beginning of the pandemic. You see that it went down to the floor, but it has been coming back since the pandemic, and it's going to continue to come back until everybody who wants to work is working. And I think we're getting very close to that right now. We're getting very close to, there's just no more available workers of people who want to work. And therein lies the problem, because from a lot of my conservative friends, I hear things like derogatory terms for people who don't want to work. And in a free country, you don't have to work. If you can support yourself by, what do you call that, the gig economy, if you just have the assets to live on and you don't have to work, I don't understand why we're angry with people who are not working. But our labor force participation rate is very consistent with where we would expect it to be with our aging population. We're in the 62% range right now. And we haven't been above 66 in 20 years. I mean, this is not anything new, and it's going to continue to probably to trend down as the baby boomers exit the workforce.
I see on there it says that the chart accounts for men and women 20 years and older. What is the top age that they, like 60 or 55 or something like that?
What top page?
The age where they stop counting that you should participate in the labor force. Like,
I think it's
not counting kids.
Yes, I think it's 65, and this is also the non-institutionalized population. If you're in an institution, we generally don't expect you to go out and work every day.
You mean institution as in prison?
Yes, any type of institutional confinement, we do not expect you to be out in the workforce.
I'm sorry you're late for work today. Yeah, I couldn't get through the gate. Is this just like baked into the cake that the baby boomers, that was the largest generation, except for I think millennials are a bigger one now, but they're I think so, or is it the next one after them?
I think
they were such a huge generation that created a big balloon, and then that balloon is deflating and it's leaving, I don't know, whatever big shoes to fill. These are not really good metaphors.
It is the baby boom generation is no longer the largest because a number of them have died.
Fair enough.
Some are quite old because you got 20 years. What is it, 18 or whatever? Is it 18 or 20 that constitutes a generation? But you've got a lot of them that are already have died. But that baby boom generation is what's putting the strain on a lot of the systems, the Social Security system that we talked about a few episodes back. The baby boomers are collecting their Social Security and they're collecting their Medicare benefits, which is not a direct collection. It's an indirect collection for medical services, which are very expensive these days with all the complex medical procedures. And we're facing a demographic funding problem because the workforce is going to continue to shrink of available workers because our internal birth rate is so low and our hostility to immigration is so high that we're going to continue to have these challenges. And that is not healthy for the economy. You want to have a carefully balanced approach to making sure you admit the workers that you need for your nation's well-being. Not because we're trying to be good to the rest of the world, but we want the workers we need. We're 14,000 short of airline pilots last time I heard. But it go across the occupations. We're short for medical, for tech, for engineers, for agriculture. I mean, you on and on and on. You go to your Wendy's restaurant, it's $15 an hour around here for starting pay, and they just don't have enough. You go into fast foods all over Metro Atlanta, I understand they're opening fewer hours, and in some instances they have to close altogether because they don't have enough people open the store. Albert was telling me the other day that he goes to this Burger King and it's typically closed, and they have one or two people there, and they say they don't have enough people to run the store.
Right.
So,
I have encountered things along those lines. So someone in chat, a person here in Georgia, says automation can be a game changer. And I can see that being a truth. But like 15 million jobs in the hole, Larry? Somewhere like some number like that?
well, automation is coming, but what the person in chat needs to realize is that the automation doesn't pay the taxes of the programs that we need. Our system works on contributions, particularly Social Security and Medicare. You need more contributing workers. And if you don't have the workers, the ratio of workers to beneficiaries keeps deteriorating. And that's where we are right now. That's why the 2.8 million trust fund that Social Security is holding is beginning to go down, because they're paying out more benefits now than what the trust fund is earning in interest on the accumulated $2.8 trillion. And the people with valid claims, even though the disability component is dropping, there's actually fewer and fewer people being awarded disability, but there are more and more retirees, and that trust fund is depleting, and it's going to deplete somewhere between 2033 and 2035. They estimated that the robust strength in the economy had increased and added a year or so to it, but now they're reneging on that because the big increase that's coming in the CPI, Social Security recipients are going to get somewhere between 8.5% and maybe a 10% raise in January. And they're saying that that's going to take a year off of it because they had calculated the raise to be closer to 4%. And now they're looking at maybe double or more of that. And that's going to mean that when you build the next raise, that's on a larger, when you build the next cost of living, the succeeding year, you're building it on a 10% higher benefit structure. So these are challenges that the automation will not fix, but businesses will have no choice. If they can't hire workers, what else can they do? So,
We should close this out too. But I wanted to point out that if automation is an answer, and I'm totally with you on what you said about taxes. If it's a robot working, then who pays the taxes? Which would then probably have to put it back on the corporate side. However, then that means that everyone within range of my voice, you need to go learn the highest level technical skills that you can come up with, so that you are not dumped out of the workforce being replaced by some robot that can put together a hamburger better than you can. But you need to then learn how to do the job of the robot fixer.
that's one thing. That's one thing you need to do. Go ahead, finish.
Well, he works at a factory, and there's a pilot program to replace. They have 30 forklifts at this place, and there's a pilot program to replace 15 of them. And he's saying, I need to know everything about it from top to bottom. He's the IT worker there, and because he's going to have to be something of the liaison between a maintenance person that can fix the physical structure of the forklift, but then there's also a whole network side and a computer side that he's also going to have to interface with programmers on. But they're going to replace, let's say it's 2 shifts or 3 shifts of people driving these forklifts. These 15 forklifts are going to replace 30 or 40 employees. This is just one factory, and that's only half of the forklifts. And if it goes successfully, they will certainly replace the other ones. This is coming hard.
Absolutely. But the other half of that, what you're telling, what the worker needs to learn to make sure they're not displaced. Also, the worker needs to learn to communicate to their elected federal officials that we have to figure out a new revenue model, because if we lose 30 million of our 150 million workers to automation in the next 5 years, that's 30 million workers who are not contributing into the Social Security system, which is going to mean a significant shortfall to pay grandma and to pay you and to pay me. And you're going to have that conversation, because Right now, the conservatives believe that if you tax companies, that all life as we know it will cease to exist. And if we're going to allow the companies to automate, we really can't in a free country, in a free market. You can't stop the companies. They're going to do what's in their interest. And automation doesn't need breaks. It doesn't need health. They don't need health benefits. They don't need all these things. So they're going to automate as the technology becomes affordable. But you're going to have to figure out a revenue replacement model, and that's going to require conversations that we don't appear to be willing to have as a nation.
All right. Well, you being Mr. Cranky that you are, we can now close everything out. Any final words before we do Who's That Speaker?
I guess not. Who is that speaker this week? I can't wait to hear that. I haven't heard it yet.
No, you have not heard it. I have left it hidden from you. But let me play who this was last week. I thought this was funny.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it?
And someone in chat said it. I didn't see any emails from anybody, but that was AOC. Alessandro Ocasio-Cortez. She is a representative, I have no idea, somewhere like Brooklyn or something, New York. And there's no way in the world, Larry, that in 12 years, which she said this 2 or 3, 4 years ago, that the world will come to an end. I just cannot see. It might not be a great place to live, but I don't see that like the world's going to come to an end. Anywho, I just wanted to make sure that we highlighted a crazy left-leaning person for once.
That does bring balance to FYP education. Thank you.
All right. Well, then this week, I don't think you're going to get it, Larry. I mean, maybe. I'm 50-50 on if I think you're going to get this one. So this is this week's.
For an American president to challenge the constitutional system and to try to overthrow the constitutional system is a grave matter, and I find no excuse for that.
Any idea, Larry?
Well, are you joking or are you serious? Because I knew the first word out of his mouth who that is.
Oh my God! Okay, of course you did. Person's old as dirt. I mean, the person's like in your generation.
Actually, I've got him by several years, but he has been around a very, very long time.
Yes, he has.
Should I give any? If you think it's that complicated, should I give any hints so that people might know?
People in chat are saying, they're telling me they know who it is. PA Dad knows who it is. And he's like, can I say it? No, you can't say it. The whole point of this, and it's going to end up on the screen with the text on it if you post it. Then it'll just be available to everybody on YouTube to just like get the answer.
So,
Brenda thinks it's 1 or 2 for her. So give them a clue then.
Well, that person served in the highest level of government back in the 70s.
All right. Well, there we go. All right. Well, that is pretty much all I have for the evening, sir. And we did get a new patron before we go. Casey came in with a year. He signed up for a year. That $1,400 a month times a year, Larry. No joke.
Wow. We're going to be having a nice vacation here very soon.
Very nice. Very nice. So thank you very much, Casey. I appreciate that. The support helps us, helps keep Larry fed and less cranky. And that's all I got. Do you have any transcript subscribers?
Not any new ones, but folks, you got to get these subscriptions coming in or else.
Or else. All right. Find all of the show notes over at registrymatters.co and fypeducation.org. You can leave voicemail as John, was it earlier? John, which is really, I don't think his name. Leave voicemail at 747-227-4477. Seriously, though, we would like to start doing more questions, especially to hold them for when maybe content is a little light, like it is this week. I think policymakers go on summer vacation there, and there's less going on. RegistryMattersCast@gmail.com. That's where you'll send the Who's That Speaker guesses, and then patreon.com/registrymatters for being a supporter of the program and gaining access to releases of the podcast early, and then also to join in the live stream. Without anything else, Larry, I think we can call it quits for the night. And I bid you adieu, and I hope you have a great weekend and stay cool, I guess. Not warm, stay cool.
Well, thank you. It is a little bit warm here today.
I bet. All right, man. Take care. Have a great night. Thanks, everybody, for joining in. And I hope that I did okay. And
You've been listening to FYP.